Well, let's talk about the quarantine facilities now that were built in the middle of the COVID pandemic. It's just all bad news this week, I'm afraid. But anyway, the three main ones are in Queensland, Victoria and Western Australia. Collectively, they cost more than $1 billion to build. What are we going to use them for now that there's no pandemic, Alexandra?
Well, the problem is they already started building them when we knew that they were not useful. So this is not 200 years ago when you've got one point of entrance and you can detain people for months on end to see if they've got the flu. This is a globalised world where you cannot possibly consider quarantining a civilization. And Queensland, Palaszczuk is a nightmare anyway. We expected her to waste hundreds of millions of dollars, okay? That was a given. It was a political stunt. But the federal Liberal government under Scott Morrison gave $500 million to Victoria to build a quarantine camp. All of these now sit empty. And the question is, why did they do it? And it was a political stunt. They panicked the population, and the only thing they could think of was, oh, well, we'll build quarantine centres and lock unvaccinated people in them for a while, and that'll make the population feel better. It was basically a fine on rejecting government policy. And now we know it had zero basis in science. And we've had no apologies, no returned money, and these large, empty elephants sitting in our states that have no purpose because by definition they were built in the middle of nowhere.
Well, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. I mean, can't they be used?
Student housing might work.
Yeah, might have to build a university next door, but I mean, this is actually a really good example of what Ronald Reagan once warned us about. Hello, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. I mean, it seems increasingly these days, Alexandra, call me cynical, but everything they do just seems to go wrong.
The only reason this level of failure, because it is a failure of process and a failure of logic, was allowed to happen was because in each state and federally, there was no opposition, there was no discussion. The press, what happened to the press? I mean, we didn't have your platform at that stage and no one was challenging politicians who were like, let's waste $500 million on a prison camp in the middle of nowhere. No one said, hang on a second, can you show us the science behind that, maybe? Before we move at the speed of science, let's have a little look at the science.
Well, it was also decided in National Cabinet, no doubt, and National Cabinet just mysteriously assumed that it had cabinet confidentiality, which I think that's debatable now, isn't it?
Well, they already lost they lost a court case and an appeal to say, no, you don't have confidentiality. So then Labor and Liberal jointly passed a new amendment to give themselves confidentiality after the fact. Now, those secrets of National Cabinet are buried deeper than the war secrets from the Second World War. Why? How much embarrassment must they have and how little science do they have if they don't want anyone alive today to ever read what they did or what they said? That doesn't say to me, trust the science. It says, we didn't have any science.
So we're being prevented from seeing how decisions were made during two of the most dramatic years in Australian history. Woke corporations are out to get us, and infantile protesters are calling the shots in the courts. It's not a very pretty picture at the moment, is it, Alexandra?
We have a very small amount of time while there are still adults in the room to stop this cycle of destruction that we have set ourselves upon. Because once all those teenagers who glue themselves to things get a bit older, they are going to create a political system that bears no resemblance to something that can run a country. And so I implore people to, at the next election, actually start challenging their politicians, because otherwise, what are we going to have left, Fred? It's not a pretty future.
It's true. Complacency isn't going to pay off right now. Alexandra Marshall, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Fred.
That's Alexandra Marshall, whose erudition, wit and insight are free to read every day on the Spectator Australia's website.